right now we're kind of in that point also with the Beach Club and trying to figure out a master plan to preserve the history and also the nature, because I'm very, very involved in the natural history and education. As one of my fellow Lemon Bay Conservancy board members, Monica, we worked on this in the, I think, 90s, back in the 1990s. But anyway, so we want to keep the preservation, the historic aspects of the property, and also be able to continue and make it sustainable for the future. And that's why this talks are so important. And how can we make it more resilient and stronger for the future to face all these things that are coming along. So I did want to tell you another story about in the mid-1960s, the Intercoastal Waterway was being built and dug, and so my dad thought, well, let's see what's going down the bayside. He's always looking for how can we get more property. So he got some stakes out of the freezer. It was after the season. Got a bunch of stakes, and we actually rowed the rowboat, family again, out to the barge where the captain was, and he said, here, would you like some stakes, and maybe you could put the pipe right here in front of the dock, right where on our bayside. And it turned out Mrs. Winans was next door. She loved to fish, and she did not want that fill on her dock, so she sat on the end of her dock with supposedly a gun across her lap. And so the captain said, well, this guy's offering us stakes over here, we'll just put the pipe over here. So we got an extra, almost 5 acres of land. So that's where our bayside, our tennis courts, and where you were parking perhaps. So that's a big addition for this side, that we can run big events like weddings and have the parking on the bayside. But while they were building, digging the Intercoastal Waterway, they were also building the bridges, because then the bridges had to open, because now traffic was going back and forth in the Intercoastal. So my brother and I had no way to get to school, because the school bus wouldn't come down, couldn't get across, and my parents were too busy running the club to try to drive us to school every day. So we ended up taking a boat. We went across Lemon Bay to our neighbors on the other side. Then they would drive us to the bus stop, then we get on the bus, and then we go to Engwood Elementary School, and all basically in the dark. Then we got to the school. The next day, that afternoon, we would go take the bus, get from the bus stop to the neighbor's house, and then come back across the bay. So one time, it was blowing pretty hard, and we only had the 3-horse motor at that time. So we couldn't really, it was cavitating every time we went over the waves. It was going, rah. So we said, all sailors, we knew what to do, so we cut across on an angle across the bay, and then got into the mangroves on the lee of the land, and we're coming up along the lee of the land, and we looked up and we said, what are all those people doing on the dock? Looks like they have a yellow raft or something there. And there's Mom and Dad, they're looking out over the bay. We had the only boat. They couldn't really rescue us, but they had the rafts and everything there. And we putted up along to the dock and said, hey, Mom and Dad, we're right here. So there were some real adventures, and it's so exciting for me to be able to run the family business and to keep it going. And working with my brothers, my mom. So I look around this property, and also the important thing are the plants and the trees, as Charles said earlier. These cabbage palms were here in 1960. They've grown probably 10 feet. Not a lot, that's 60 years. But they are resilient. They will survive the hurricane. They bend in the hurricane, and they did not break off. So we were lucky with the last Ian that it came from the east. And we lost a lot of tree canopy, but hopefully it'll grow back. We also lost a lot of the strangler figs, which are sticking up above the tree line. They went over, but none of them hit the buildings, so all the buildings were secured. And then luckily we had Charles already lined up, so he got his roofers over immediately and was able to patch the roofs that we needed. And then we continued to trim and pick up all the debris that then was onto the road, and FEMA came and picked it up. And that was a wonderful thing that they were able to help us out in that way.
Let me talk just a little bit about the history of the Key. We have always known this place as the Minnesota Beach Club, but it was actually called the Palm. This island was actually called Palm Ridge. Maybe some of you know that. And originally this was called the Palm Ridge Club. It was Arthur Gwynn in 1950 who renamed it the Minnesota Beach Club. We see the name Palm Ridge. I only found one reference to it, and that was in a plat of Englewood dating 1896. And although the plat was really showing downtown Englewood, it showed this adjoining island as Palm Ridge. One of the reasons that the island sort of developed so differently, I'm always struck by how different the Charlotte County portion of the island is compared to the Sarasota County portion, is that the road between what is today's North Bridge and today's South Bridge was closed for a period of time, from about 1943 to 1953. It had washed out in a flood. And so consequently, the island almost developed as two different communities. And I think we still see that sort of residual effect now. And that's one explanation for the differences. As I said, this building is around 1900. We know that the Hermitage dates from a similar period of time, plus or minus a couple of years. So the earliest structures here were around 1900. So when we look at the early history prior to 1930, the property was owned by a woman named Ida Willits. And I did find an advertisement in the 1930s that showed that there was a public dining room here, and it was advertised to the public as a place with boats, good fishing, and bathing at a reasonable price. And so that was the earliest ad I saw. That was 1930, yeah. So I talked a little bit about Arthur and Mildred Gwynn. That period of time from 1950 to 1960 was a fascinating time in the history of the club. As I mentioned, they renamed it Minnesota Beach Club. They did have a dining room that was open to the public, and it followed an old Florida theme, complete with Spanish moss, and a menu featuring native Florida seafood, which was available for guests and members of the public. So short of the Spanish moss, not too different from the wonderful menu we see here today. Let's see, what else might be of interest here? So, as we know, oh, that's okay, thank you. Buffy's parents, Robert and Sydney, purchased the club in 1960, and we're very fortunate that we have family members that are still operating it today. When the land was first purchased by the Buffums, the club was much smaller, and as we walk around the site a little bit later, we can point out to you the buildings which are contributing to the National Register Historic District and the buildings and structures which are not. We're very fortunate that of the 19 structures on the site, 17 of them contribute to the National Register Historic District. It's only the pool and the golf and the tennis pros house that do not contribute. So the Buffums had a wide-ranging view, very expansive view of what they wanted here. They purchased the lands that adjoined the site in all directions possible, to the south, the north, and the east. And then they built several buildings, including the Kingfisher and the Sanderling, the Blue Heron, the Owl, and a few others. One of the things that our research discovered, which was also pretty interesting, was that the newer buildings were actually done by architects who are associated with the Sarasota School of Architecture. So Frank Folsom Smith and James Holliday, who was actually somebody I knew. And so it was really nice to be able to establish this sort of continuum of beachfront living from the 1900s to the mid-1960s, and from an architectural standpoint, to be able to see how the style had been adapted to suit more modern lifestyle, and how we were interpreting beachfront living in the 1960s compared to how it was interpreted in the 1900s. The sort of things that architectural historians enjoy talking about. So I'll give you a little bit of a status on the National Register District. The last week of December, I took the nomination to the Sarasota County Historic Preservation Board. The National Register program is administered by the state of Florida, the Department of Historical Resources. We have a National Register Review Board, and then they provide recommendations to the National Park Service. And of course, it's ultimately the National Park Service that confers the National Register listing. The state looks to local government to provide recommendations on whether buildings or districts are eligible. We got a favorable recommendation from the Sarasota County National Register Review Board on December 27th. That's been transmitted up to the state. On February 2nd in the afternoon, Buffy and I will be participating remotely, and maybe Charles will join us, in a meeting with the National Register Review Committee, which meets up in Tallahassee. And they'll be reviewing the nomination. Staff will be making a presentation. We're looking for a favorable recommendation from them, and then the proposal will go up to the National Park Service, and I believe they have 90 days to comment on it. So perhaps within the next 3 months we'll have what will be the end of a very long process here. But it's a fascinating site. It's very complicated. It's very, very unique. One of my greatest challenges was the state wanted me to develop an historic context for the site and to look to see what other comparable establishments there were around here. And really, I couldn't find any, was the bottom line. I looked at the Eagle Point Club, and although their buildings are from a similar era, they really operated very differently. The Minnesota Beach Club still operates as it did in the 1930s, which was a club that also welcomed the public into their dining and to use their facilities. So anyway, we're looking forward to the National Register review early in February, and hopefully we'll have a big announcement sometime in the spring. So with that, I will pass it on to Charles. I was to talk a little bit about the past, and you'll be talking a little bit about resiliency and how the National Register affects that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Larry. Is the button on?
I didn't touch anything.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Laurie. What a wonderful place. And we're going to try to keep it that way.
Hold it up to your mouth.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep. I was saying what a wonderful place this is, and we want to try to keep it that way, and that's why we're here talking about resilience. Just to give you an idea of my background, I'm a licensed general contractor who does basically historic preservation work throughout the state of Florida. We're based in DeLand. Are you hearing this?
No, you have to hold it right up close.
Let's see. Like that? Hear me now? No. How about now? No?
Keep it on. It's okay.
How about now? No? Wow.
I
Okay.
don't know what to
Where's
say.
our IT guy? Or I could talk
So
louder.
it's hard for me to tell.
Talk louder? Yep.
So maybe I didn't touch any of the buttons to my knowledge.
And I'm not
talk
getting
right
anything
into
out of it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, what did I not do?
You're good. Just
Okay,
right,
I just
like
right to
I
there.
told Lori, right?
Okay, I guess.
There you go.
Operator error. Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, I'm a licensed general contractor that does pretty much specializes in historic preservation throughout the state. We're working with the city of Port St. Lucie right now on a few buildings, a lodge and a house that they moved to one of their public parks. We've done work in South Florida, the Hollywood Women's Club, for instance, and I'll get a little bit of detail on that when I get to that in the presentation. But in any case, I've also been very active in historic preservation, currently on the City of DeLand's Historic Preservation Board. And I also served with the City of Fort Lauderdale's Preservation Board for over 10 years and chaired it for a couple of years. So I've been pretty actively involved in that for quite some time. And I was called into this property by Steve Avdakov, who with Heritage Architectural. And he was doing a study on the various buildings, their conditions, and I was brought in to do basically the numbers and how we'd restore some of the buildings. And so that's how we got here. Then shortly after that, there was Hurricane Ian. And Hurricane Ian changed a few things. The one thing that we're really lucky here is that the hurricane didn't hit us straight on or didn't head to Tampa, because what happened basically is that hurricane, by going south, brought the prevailing strong winds from the east. So from a resilience standpoint, our protection here, this time, the trees, okay? Without those trees, we would have had much more damage than we took in Hurricane Ian. So we lucked out on that, but we can't count on that. So basically, at this point, you know, the tree canopy absorbed the energy of the hurricane. We had several trees that we lost, a bunch of trees that we lost, a lot of branches that we lost.
This is an ideal place for people in Florida and around and from Europe who love the sun and the real heat of the summer. And we have air conditioning, of course, in the rooms, and we have TV, and we have all the amenities that have been added through the years. And so the beach is just the same. And the clear water in the summer is unbelievable. We have a ledge which is out in front, and when you can see it in the clear weather and water, and it's glassy calm, and boats go by, and it is, but the beach is practically empty. It's your place. And at night, when the lights are on, you walk home and you can, underneath the oak trees, you can look up and see the sky and the stars. But around you, surrounding you, is all the greenery and the oaks and the planting, which is natural to Florida. This is a treasure which many people have never seen.
We had to redo the driveways and parking areas and things like that. So it did cause a considerable amount of damage. But as you can see, we still maintain a really attractive tree canopy. The feel of the place is still pretty much the same. And so I think that we dodged a major bullet here, but like I said, we can't count on it. So we have to get ready for the next one that may be coming straight in from the west. So in any case, let's see. One of the main things that got damaged in the hurricane was roofs. And part of this is that, and most of it was asphalt fiberglass shingles. Really bad material in a hurricane zone, okay? Virtually no wind uplift. You know, in a hurricane, our enemy is uplift. Wind gets under things, rips it off. We had to restore some roofing on the Owl, where a whole corner of the building was, you know, the roofing itself was torn off. Luckily, it didn't get into the structure, again, because we had some buffering by the trees. But we did have to replace roofing on that. We had to replace some roofing on the Gull, and those are up in that direction. And the clubhouse took some considerable damage as well. But again, if, as you can see, the clubhouse now has the shingles on it. Now in the past, when we look back at the historic record, when we're doing resilience, when we go to replace this roof, we certainly don't want to go back with the same material that's been defective for us. So we look back at some of the pictures, and I think, Laura, you've got some pictures. It was probably, at least in the period of significance, had an asbestos shingle, which is a multi-angular shingle. Now, we obviously can't and wouldn't want to put asbestos on it, but what we're investigating is a hurricane-rated shingle that looks like that, so that when you stand back and look at it, it will virtually be the same look as the look that we had in the period of significance. So that's one of the things that we'll be doing with the clubhouse, because we have photographic records of what this building looked like, and so that's why we're going to try to get back to that in that period of significance. Then other things when we're dealing with resiliency is sometimes we have to deal with structural issues. We've got some of the buildings, that in the 50s and 60s, builders were experimenting with different products. Some products which were better than others, and one of those issues on some of the buildings as we do our walkabout today, I'll be able to show you some siding that was probably put out by something similar to the Masonite Company, and it's a very thin material, probably not more than about 1/4 of an inch, and it's and certainly it's no match for hurricanes in the state of Florida. In addition to being a problem for water moisture gathering. So when we go to make that building more resilient, we're going to have to replace that siding again with something that would be appropriate for the period of significance, but more durable. So that's something we'll be able to see on our walkabout, is how we'll have to do that. Now, when you have siding, when you find siding like that, now when you start taking that apart, you're probably going to find studs and issues with the moisture intrusion that caused you to have to go in and fix that. So the resilience doesn't just stop with what you see. You have to go layer by layer till you solve the problem, work your way back, and when it's a preservation job, you want to do that in a way that's sensitive to the architecture of not only the building but the district. So that's another thing that we'll be working on as we work through the process. And then let's see. Then the other thing with hurricanes that we have to deal with is flooding. Obviously, sometimes we're subject to major storm surges. Sometimes we get water trapped in areas. There are some areas, like we're based out of the city of DeLand. I'm still getting notices on my phone about the flood warnings from the 2 hurricanes that came through. So the St. Johns River is still flooding, even though the storm is now well in the past. So we have to, so we look at ways to mitigate that. One of the jobs that we did about 8 years ago was for the Hollywood Women's Club, where their building was set at a certain height back in 1927. Then the city kept building up the road and building up the road until now the water was draining off the road under the building. So what happened was that ruined the foundation. Foundation was perfectly all right without that kind of water intrusion. But then once the water started intruding, it caused that to deteriorate. So basically on that project, we actually lifted that building up in the air about 10 feet. We demolished the original foundation. We put in about 35 helical piles, built grade beams under it, and then put it back down. And one of the things that, as a contractor, when I went in there, the architect had drawn up something that would put it back where it was. Well, I could see when we lifted it up, we could see the water line where the water was coming up and getting into the floor joist about that much, okay? So clearly we didn't want to put it back down there. So basically I insisted that they put it back down at a level that we knew wasn't going to flood, at least in 100-year floodplain. And so that enabled us to bring the site up, stop the water intrusion. Of course, we made the flooding a little bit worse on the street because now we're not the city's drainage retention area. Okay, so we had to deal a few issues on that. But the point is that in order to make that building resilient, we had to make sure that it had the right foundation and it was at the right level. And so we were able to do that. And then recently we went back and we finished the renovation and we replaced windows. They had taken out windows like you see on the clubhouse, those original windows, the double hung wood windows. We were able to take the aluminum awning windows that somebody had put in as part of that progress we were talking about in the 50s and 60s. Well, we were able to take those out and go back to the original windows. We actually had the jambs, the original window jambs were still there. So we were able to do that. But now we didn't want to just go back with a window that could get damaged in the next hurricane. So they also had operable shutters. So we actually created a shutter system that was just like the old days, but stronger, and where we could close those shutters during a hurricane warning and open them back up when they had passed. So, and we had to work with the building officials, and part of the issue of the National Register is that people don't understand also that there's a whole chapter in the Florida Building Code dealing with historic properties, chapter 12 of the existing building manual. And so that building allows for alternate solutions, whereas if it wasn't a historic building, I would have had a really hard time replacing those aluminum awning windows with anything that wasn't a Florida certified product approved window, okay? But we were able to work our way around that because we had chapter 12 and we had a solution that actually would stop most hurricane winds. So basically, and that's part of how you would deal with resilience on a historic building, because another builder, another architect could have come in there and said, oh, let's just replace the windows, and you'd end up with some sort of metal window and it wouldn't look the same and you lose the whole character of the window, the whole character of the building. So that there's a different approach when you're dealing with a historic building than there is with dealing with something that's not as significant. So then I guess the final thing that I wanted to talk about also is economic resilience, because clearly these storms happen, and it throws everybody in a tailspin. And luckily we have some really good federal programs that help keep you on your feet and take care of some of the repairs and things like that. And that's really a key on properties like this, is you've got an ongoing thriving business that can be totally shut down in a matter of one storm. And so that we have to make sure that, number one, that we don't take as much, we take the minimum damage that we can. And then, number two, that we have a way out of it. How do we solve this problem? How do we move forward? And so it's also really important that we address the economics of it, so that everything that we do in any of the renovations of a project like this, we want to make sure that we do it for the long term. Short-term solutions will come back to haunt you pretty quickly sometimes. And so we try to look at the long view. And the long view also makes your maintenance easier to, your property easier to maintain. It keeps your cost of maintenance down, so that you make that one-time capital improvement, but do it right, and it makes it a lot easier to maintain. So that's kind of our approach on that. And then finally, this place has quite a storied past, and we feel it has a great future as we get into our master planning process. Part of our master planning process is looking at this property as a whole and seeing what is the best way to operate it, what's the best way forward, what's the best order of renovation and restoration of buildings, and so that if we do it right, we won't be doing this for a long time. That this will be intact, and we'll be able to enjoy this property and us and our children and so forth. So and that's also going to be part of this whole process is community involvement. And the fact that we see this many people here today is great. Because it shows an interest, and as we go through the master planning process, we'll be probably asking you to come back and talk with us about your thoughts and your feeling about how this place operates and how we can make it better, and how we can move into the future.
This is an ideal place for people in Florida and around from Europe who love the sun and the real heat of the summer. And we have air conditioning, of course, in the rooms, and we have TV, and we have all the amenities that have been added through the years. And so the beach is just the same. And the clear water in the summer is unbelievable. We have a ledge which is out in front, and when you can see it in the clear weather and water, and it's glassy calm, and boats go by, and but the beach is practically empty. It's your place. And at night, when the lights are on, you walk home and you can, underneath the oak trees, you can look up and see the sky and the stars. But around you, surrounding you, is all the greenery and the oaks and the planting, which is natural to Florida. This is a treasure which many people have never seen.